Hi, this is Bob Fitrakis bringing you the other side of the news.
Death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord, yeah.
I'm speaking with Pat Marida, a well-known environmental activist in Ohio, and we're going to be talking about some very interesting developments in Ohio politics. Welcome to the other side of the news, Pat.
Hi, Bob, and thanks for having me and talking about these issues.
All right, well, let's get down to the big issue, House Bill 6 and what looks like bribery and corruption. The shocking thing, $61 million or more. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's just amazing. And of course, we all knew that First Energy was putting a lot of money into this, tons of it, but we didn't know how it was being done so illegally. And of course, even as our governor has said, we need to re-examine Citizens United that even lets all of this happen and lets people donate without revealing who they are to the public.
Well, because in part, right, this was so-called dark money.
It was very dark money. Yeah, I mean, there was one donor to this, this householder pack, Generation Now, and they didn't do any charitable donating. They gave it all to Householder for his slush fund. And then he, of course, had Team Householder, which was 21 people who are implicated in the scheme, but then they can claim that they didn't know where it came from. And that's kind of plausible deniability there.
Yeah, so they were using a social welfare organization, a 501c4, which is, I think you pointed it out, is legal under Citizens United. Is that you don't have to say where that money came from. Again, are you suggesting that we ought to change the law?
Oh, absolutely. There's a large movement in the country to try to overturn it. It's a big job, of course, but it really needs to happen, or else take it back to the Supreme Court and let them revisit it in some other type of form.
Now, when this bill came out, you were obviously opposed to it. Didn't it? Wasn't it pretty much suspect from the start? I mean, it was what, $1 billion bailout, including the bailing out of a dirty energy plant in Indiana. I mean, how did they even get away with this in the first place?
Well, it is rather shocking that that can be done nowadays with a straight face. Bailing out two failing and aging and brittle nuclear reactors that are really dangerous, including like First Energy had all these exemptions for we have a list of at least 19 of exemptions from inspections and upgrades because they're old and they can't afford. See, it's very expensive to do that, so they want to not do those essential things.
Well, Pat, the question arises, how could they get this HB 6 passed in the first place? My understanding is you've got these nuclear plants, Davis, Bessie, and Perry, were essentially decrepit and not in the best of shape. What can you tell our listeners?
It's amazing. They are past their engineered lifespans of 40 years, or Davis Bessie is. Davis Bessie has received, First Energy has received, we have a record of 19 maintenance and repair waivers because it's very expensive to do that, and they don't want to put any money into these old machines. Now, how they managed to get it through the legislature is really quite amazing because not only were they asking for these bailouts for nuclear, but they asked for bailouts for a couple of coal plants, one of which was in Indiana.
So when you saw this originally, was there any hint that this was nothing but a pay-to-play political deal? I mean, what we didn't know was the out-and-out corruption, right? I mean, all this stuff we're talking about, they were allowed to do this. They were allowed to take the taxpayers' money and essentially write a huge subsidy to obsolete technology.
Well, and they also, that wasn't good enough to just subsidize them. They had to deep six their competition by actually cutting, actually did undercut House Bill 221, which had been the renewable and energy efficiency standards, which was really helping a lot to bring on actually real carbon-free energy. And the other thing that they did was talk about, I mean, the industry has this biggest lie that nuclear is carbon-free. And it's amazing that they can get away with it because, of course, the chain reaction is carbon-free. The chain reaction produces forever deadly radioactive waste, which is the actual product of the nuclear chain reaction. But carbon is released all the way through the entire fuel chain, from uranium mining, milling, refining, to the fuel fabrication, and so forth. And it exposes, the mining and milling are done on Native American lands, which is, in fact, uranium mining is done on indigenous lands all around the world, every country.
And wasn't there a push to store the radioactive waste on Native American land also?
Yes, of course, Yucca Mountain, and in Texas and New Mexico, there are now 2 proposed sites to store all of America's high-level radioactive waste. Not just, but it's quote unquote, it's temporary, it's interim. And so that means it either stays there permanently or it gets moved somewhere else. And both of those are private companies that volunteered to take it, and on Native American lands. Well, near Native American communities and Latinx communities.
Okay, and both of us go back far enough to remember when they tried to put a, quote, low-level waste dump in Ohio, and the people in central Ohio fought that back. What about this HB 6? Should it be repealed? Is it going to be easy to get it repealed? The governor was against it, and now apparently he's for it. What are your thoughts there?
Well, of course it should be repealed. Of course, I can't predict the future, but it does seem like it would be a smart thing for all of us to call our legislators and insist that this happen, and that would certainly make a difference. And write a letter to your editor as well.
Well, it looks like the governor's suggesting it be repealed and then a version of it then be passed to save the nukes and keep people working. What do you say to that?
Well, I do think that that's one of the reasons why it would be difficult to repeal it, is because I think these legislators would then have a difficult time trying to pass another one, especially if they didn't have a lot of funding and backup from First Energy. So that's going to make it maybe a little harder to get it repealed.
This is The Other Side of the News, streaming to you from the Indy-Media studios of the Free Press Network on YouTube, but also available online at WGRN.org, plus Listen to us on Columbus, Ohio's 2 volunteer-run low-power FM radio stations, Friday at 5:30 p.m. on 94.1 FM, The Green Renaissance, and rebroadcasted Mondays at 4:30 p.m. on WCRS, the community radio station, both 92.7 and 98.3 FM.
The other side of the news, I'm talking to Pat Marida, well-known environmental activist who's commenting on many subjects today, including HB 6 and the notorious bribery scandal. You're also concerned with HB 104. What's that?
Well, that's an incredible bill that's so absurd that we didn't think it would go anywhere. It started out as 34 pages and ended up as 10 pages. And there's a story behind that. But I testified against it, I think it was last October in the Ohio House. And then we didn't hear much more about it until hearings started up again late this spring. So the 34 pages were clearly written because the language was the same as the website of a small company called E-Generation, which is up in Cleveland. And they are promoting thorium reactors. And so this legislation would actually create an Ohio Nuclear Development Authority. And in the meantime, the 34 pages got reduced to 10 pages, so that language that was on E-Generation's website does not appear any longer in the bill.
Well, it's good to have a eraser or an editor. So it came right off this company's website.
Yeah, but well, it does absurd things, like it gives the state of Ohio ownership of high-level radioactive waste, could take it, all of it, from Perry and Davis-Besse, turn it over to the state of Ohio. You can imagine how much they know how to deal with it, or what the Ohio ratepayers, taxpayers, everybody would be liable for an accident in this case. And then this Ohio Nuclear Development Authority would actually be answerable to no one, not even to the governor, to spend the money that they get. And yeah, it is kind of unbelievable.
Well, it worked pretty well. This has been tried before in Ohio under George Voinovich, the North Ohio Valley Air Authority. You remember the big trash burner in East Liverpool. They created a little authority just for them. And of course, they went on to be one of the greatest polluters in the history. And shockingly, were involved in bribing George Voinovich's brother, Paulie Voinovich. So it seems to be a pattern when these private companies want the state to set up these authorities. And you mentioned they have a different type of reactor?
So, well, the government is promoting, because they're very, very afraid of that as they see the nuclear industry dying, and Wall Street won't step up and pay for any new research or anything. The government is wanting to give money to develop what they call advanced nuclear reactors, which there's nothing really advanced about them. They call them small. They're not really scalable. And so this company, E-Generation, wants a bunch of money, we don't know how much, to do some research on 2 different kinds of proposals, although there's really nothing's been developed with this. There's no prototype for this. They're just starting from scratch to develop 2 new kinds of nuclear reactors. One would be molten salt, and the other one would be based on thorium for fuel. Well, the thorium for fuel requires uranium-233, and they have to reprocess the fuel that they would be taking from Perry and Davis-Besse. In other words, extract uranium-233 out of it, and then they would have the fuel. After all of that trouble, have the fuel for their thorium reactor, which has not even been engineered yet.
Uh, oh, have they thought about going bankrupt like First Energy? It
Well,
seems weird. And this bill, it sounds so absurd. It sounds like you're making it up. We're in the middle of a Saturday Night Live routine. Hi, you're going to subsidize me for making this nuclear reactor that's never been built.
well,
Why would anybody do that other than money and greed?
yeah, I mean, it's rather surprising because we were stunned when it passed the House on June 9th, 80-11, and a bunch of Democrats voted for it. And of course, well, why? Did they know what's in it? Well, clearly they didn't. It may have been that he was shepherding it through the House, so it may have been that his influence, was primary in this one too.
Okay, well, a lot going on in Ohio. Now, you also wanted to speak a little about the 75th anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. What's on your mind there?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking about that because, that is such a tragedy and it's actually still ongoing. And the war had been won 6 months before. The United States was bombing Japan with impunity. As President Eisenhower said, they didn't need to drop that awful thing. So we are having a commemoration. It's going to be on Thursday, August 6th, and it's going to be here in Columbus at the Washington Gladden Social Justice Park, which is a very appropriate place to do this. It's on East Broad Street. It's 404 East Broad Street at the corner of Cleveland Avenue. And we're going to have several speakers. We'll be talking about the history of the Manhattan Project and the bomb. We'll be have people, Japanese Americans, talking about the effects on the ground. And we'll be talking about the treaties such as the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons that gives us, a positive, something that we can, that can happen, that can help the world rid itself of these weapons.
And speaking of Japan, they were nuked, so to speak, not militarily, a second time with Fukushima. What's going on there? Is that still a problem?
Well, in Fukushima, the medical doctors have been forbidden to even talk to their patients and tell their patients that the disease, what the health problems they have might be related to that accident. And the accident there, of course, is ongoing. The reactors are ruptured and leaking, and worst thing is that it's down in a low spot near the ocean, and so water seeps down through it. And as this water comes out, it's contaminated. So they have, I don't know how many, maybe over 30,000 tanks full of radioactive water.
And what are they going to do with that?
Well, they don't know. They've run out of room for the tanks, and so they are proposing to dump it in the ocean now.
All right, and how much radioactivity was there in the world prior to Hiroshima?
I'm sorry?
Was there a lot of background nuclear, waste contamination in the world prior to Hiroshima?
Well, no, this technology was really started by the Manhattan Project when the United States found out that Germany was working on a nuclear weapon. They decided we needed to do the same thing. And so the Manhattan Project, just about every state in the Union, I think, was working on developing this bomb. And that was the first. Of course, they spewed radioactivity around the country while they were doing the formulation. But that was the first, real, in Alamogordo, New Mexico, was actually the first place that a nuclear weapon was ever used.
So we kind of tested it a little on ourselves. And
We have, yes, at the Nevada nuclear test site. And those places were, well, that was on Shoshone land, the Nevada nuclear test site. And in New Mexico, it was Native American and Latinx people were the ones that were exposed to that.
well, we got a couple minutes left. What would you like to tell our listeners? Any calls to actions, any ways to contact you or groups you work with?
Well, yes, you can contact me. My email is my name, Pat Marida, PATMARIDA @outlook.com. You can find more information. There's a lot of good information on the Ohio Sierra Club's website. If you go there and look for the Nuclear Free Committee, you can find out a lot about what I've been talking about today. And I would certainly invite people to come out next Thursday and participate in our discussion. We are going.
Well, and there's been some talk that the Sierra Club may also get involved with election integrity to ensure American elections are free and fair.
So, well, it would be important to really thank you, Bob, for your work on this. And you and Harvey have been the backbone of this across the country. And we need mail-in ballots, and we need chain of custody for this. And it's just critical. And we also, of course, you talked about the strip and flip elections. We need to not have people, especially brown and black people, stripped from the rolls.
All right. Thank you, Pat Marida. Thank you for being on the other side of the news.
Well, thank you very much for having me and for bringing up these topics.
Dr. Bob joined Pat Marida and nuclear energy activist Harvey Wasserman, along with others, for a Zoom series titled Stop the Bribe, to draw attention to the $60 million bailout and the wind energy setback clause that is stifling innovation.
We want to discuss strategy in terms of HB 6, talk about the wind setback and see if we can't take this opportunity to get rid of the wind setback, which is stopping $4 billion worth of wind development in northern Ohio. And we also want to talk about HB 104. But in the Ohio Code in 2015, I believe, the Republicans stuck in a single sentence that says that you can't build a windmill within 1,500 feet of a road or another building, which is completely outrageous, and this single sentence is stopping $4 billion worth of wind development in northern Ohio, which would completely change the entire energy picture in the state. If it said 500 instead of 1,500 feet, there would be $4 billion worth of wind development in northern Ohio. So, and nobody's talking about this, but if they're going to rescind HB 6, and then they're going to turn around and reinstate the bailout for the nuclear plants, somehow this wind setback clause has to get stuck into the dialogue. And Stephen Caruso is also pointing out that fracking in this state also gets a free rein. Pat Marida.
Yeah, so I'm not so sure that how anxious that they will be to rescind to rescind it, because that would mean that then they'd have to redo another one, and they don't want to do that. But I think your idea of getting something to maybe take out the deep sixing of the of Senate Bill 221 of the renewable and energy portfolios in House Bill 6, rescind that part, and also change that wind setback law. That line was added at the last minute to a budget that needed to pass, and so even a lot of people didn't even know that it was in there. I mean, that was a very dirty trick. So there's a possibility of maybe, it seems it's not so drastic, at least a start to get those two back in force.
Okay, so Kevin says repeal HB 6, but block any attempt to renew the nuclear bailout. The other thing is, if the legislature and the governor turn around and do another a bailout, I think we should demand that it not be approved by the legislature, but that they go to a statewide vote. Now, we could conceivably lose a statewide vote. I doubt that we would, but we might lose it. But at least it'll take them about a year to get another referendum up. Certainly, quite a few months. Kevin, do you want to call on that?
My overriding priority is to shut down Davis Bessie for safety purposes. So, however that's accomplished, I'm all for it.
Well, that's the question. If we can stop the bailout or even postpone it, one thing about demanding a statewide vote is we get a statewide vote, which I think we'd win, but it'll also take them a long time. The public, Terry Lodge is pointing out the public has only 90 days to circulate petitions for a referendum, but the legislature can call for a referendum.
Good luck.
Well, yeah, but they may, the question now is, do they actually have the votes in the legislature to repass the bailout? They were pretty close last time. I mean, are any of the Democrats, they needed the Democrats last time. Are any of the Democrats going to stick their necks out again and vote for another bailout? Does anybody have any idea on that?
Do you really think that they really want that to come before the legislature? I think they don't. They don't think they want to touch it with a 10-foot pole.
The governor has called for them to rescind HB 6. I don't know if they will. Is anybody working the legislature? Does anybody have any sense of what's going on in there?
Well, we ought to do that. That's really important right now. No harm done. We need to get a hold of these people and tell them also to refund the money that they got from First Energy.
Well, there are two
to donate it to charity.
Well, I know Pat knows more than I do, but there's a Sierra Club action alert several days ago. It had 800 signatures already that called for repeal of HB 6. So there's stuff going on. I don't know all of it, but there are things happening.
The governor has called for HB 6 to be repealed. And there must be people on the, Bob, do you have a connection to David Leland? I mean, does anybody have people they can call in the legislature?
Well, I think you can call just about any Dem now. Yeah, I don't know who's going to be supporting it. I mean, it's the ideal time. That the problem, right, is that Householder controlled a variety of Dems through the deals he cut with the union, right? That he wouldn't move Ohio towards a right to work state in exchange for their support of him as the speaker. We should call them all. I mean, who's going to be for keeping the bailout and being pro-nuke at this point if we can't do it now?
If you're interested in joining this conversation, please register for free at wgrn.org/stop-the-bribe.
Then hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord, yeah.